The Soviet of Ministers of the USSR, State Committee for the State of Emergency. Date: February 2, 2024. Decree. The Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, represented by the State Committee for the State of Emergency in the USSR as the Supreme State Authority of the USSR, expresses its respect and wishes for peace and creation to all great, united, sovereign Soviet people, all subjects of law, and the entire world community. Hereby proclaims. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR informs, notifies that the law enforcement activities of the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation, CSE of the Russian Federation, are recognized as legally illegal and unlawful. All elections held voting since 1993 in the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia. Their results are obviously void, invalid, without legal force and enforcement throughout the sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. To carry out reorganization, rehabilitation, reorganization, change of ownership, and re-registration of the foreign trading company Russian Federation, Russia, in the State Register of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics under the State Treasury of the USSR, re-registration was carried out. The final completion of the transaction of the unconditional establishment of ownership of the company Russian Federation, Russia, took place on March 8, 2023, and was confirmed by a document, Notification of the People's State Authority in the Sovereign Territory of the USSR, of the State Sovereign International Consumer Cooperative Light Great Russia, number 16, INF dated on 21st of February 2023 to all subjects of law. In accordance with the sovereign legislation of the USSR and the completion of registration for the unconditional right of ownership of the company Russian Federation, Russia, it was re-registered from the Anglo-British jurisdiction to the sovereign jurisdiction of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, namely to the State Register of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics as the State Treasury USSR, as the State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation, Russia. All elective positions and positions as state in the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia, and now State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation, Russia, are vacant, and the illegal chambers of the Federal Assembly in the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia, are not active or replaced by other unconstitutional bodies and persons, and all their acts since 1993 by the State Committee of the State of Emergency USSR, as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the Central Executive Committee of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, CSE of the USSR, as the supreme central body of the state executive power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, are recognized as obviously insignificant, invalid, forged or falsified by known or substitute persons. And based on Regulation Number 19 on November 12, 2023 of the State Committee on the State of Emergency of the USSR, in connection with the criminal anti-national activities as the acting president of the State Cooperative Enterprise, the Russian Federation, Russia, Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich, and non-execution of the prescribed legal acts of the Great Sovereign Country of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, represented by the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the supreme body of state power of the USSR, and also in connection with the recognition of the uncertainty of the physical existence of this entity, taking into account the sharp deterioration of the economic situation in the sovereign territory of the USSR, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was removed from his position, the position of acting president of the State Cooperative Enterprise, Russian Federation, Russia, without the right to appeal with all relevant legal consequences. On September 24, 2023, the person filling the position of the self-appointed president of the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia, currently the State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation, Russia, congratulated the juror non-existent employees of the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation, Russia, the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia, with the 13th anniversary, which, by virtue of private regulations, cannot have employees due to non-compliance and violation by employees of the private federal law of April 13, 2021, number 116 FZ, on amendments to certain legislative acts of the trading company of the Russian Federation, Russia. Since April 13, 2021, all employees and officials of private federal bodies of the former trading company Russian Federation, Russia, are in similar situation. On December 13, 2023, the Central Election Commission of the former trading company Russian Federation issued a falsified, fictitious resolution number 142, 1086-8, on the regulations on the specifics of the preparation and conduct of presidential elections during the period of martial law in part of the territory of the Russian Federation, which in view lack of legal actions it wasn't possible to pass state registration. After which the holding of insignificant elections of the fictitious president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia is a deliberately illegal act and an illegal action throughout the sovereign territory of the great sovereign country of the USSR. On December 18, 2023, a person illegally filling the position of the president of the state cooperative enterprise Russian Federation Russia, in connection with his dismissal, arrived at the Central Election Commission to submit documents as a fictitious candidate for the void, illegal, reached presidential elections of 2024, which were legally adopted by the liquidated, falsified, fictitious Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation Russia, thereby, by its falsified, fictitious resolutions, registered a group of voters created to support the self-nomination of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin in the non-existent and fictitious presidential elections in 2024, which is and is recognized by the Sovereign Decree State Emergency Committee of the USSR as an issue due to the fact that the falsified insignificant resolution couldn't pass state registration as a normative legal act, since the law enforcement activities of the Central Executive Committee of the State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation Russia were terminated in the absence of the falsified, fictitious citizens, the Russian Federation, as incapacitated individuals have only electoral and political rights in the USSR on behalf of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia. Rosreestr is a former trading company Russian Federation Russia, currently the State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation Russia, is void, falsified an act that couldn't receive proper publication in the official press, as a false and illegal body, couldn't obtain state registration on the legal basis that Rosreestr as a private federal body, and its service doesn't have the corresponding rights and powers in relation to cooperation and provision private services of the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation, as well as the real estate and property rights belonging to the sovereign citizens of the USSR. Based on the directive of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR No. 7 of June 21, 2023 on the application of the Soviet emergency legislation of the USSR to establish a legal regime during the transition period, the norms and provisions of the Civil Code of the RSFSR of the 1st of August 1950, the provisions of the Civil Procedure Code of the RSFSR of June 11, 1964, and the Criminal Code of the RSFSR of October 27, 1960 are enforced and applied. Basic Law, Constitution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics of October 7, 1977, without restrictions and legal reservations is valid. The draft constitution of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia from 1993 as a charter of a legal entity doesn't have the right to exist and apply in exchange for the action of the Soviet Basic Law, as supremacy over private federal laws has no law enforcement effects throughout the sovereign territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR informs, notifies, recognizes by this sovereign decree all private federal bodies, services, officials, substitutes, and other persons of the State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation Russia that the appointment of fictitious elections as the President of the Russian Federation Russia on March 15th, 16th, and 17th, 2024, according to the insignificant resolution of the Federal Council of the Federal Assembly, Russian Federation Russia, dated December 7, 2023, on establishment elections as the President of the Russian Federation and their conduct according to the voter resolution number 2076, dated December 8, 2023, on measures to assist election commissions in the exercise of their powers in the preparation and conduct of presidential elections, Russian Federation, illegally didn't take place and didn't happen on the legal basis, that the above resolution, as not issued, did not receive its publication in the printed publication of the Russian Federation Russia, after which its publication in the official press is invalid, non-normative, void and cancelled act. The fictitious resolution refers to the unapplied and unpublished law of the president and no president elections, which since 1993 has been considered as a null and falsified act and is subject to recognition as an attempt to criminally seize power in the great sovereign country of the USSR by a foreign criminal group of persons, and the person replacing and using the name as the president of the former trading company, Russian Federation Russia, which puts them in the position of persons declared outlaws and entails the recognition of the rights, powers, and competencies from the moment of its election, and non-arising insignificant and null, criminal, and to the recognition of his activities as insignificant, protest. The holding elections in 2024 for the fictitious president of the Russian Federation Russia and the fraudulent results of such elections are deliberately illegal criminal act and will have no legal force and legal consequences throughout the sovereign territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, except for criminal ones. Responsibility for this responsible for participating in them and conducting presidential elections. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR informs and notifies the conscious and deceived citizens of the USSR that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, as a self-employed, self-appointed, and self-elected person, issued a decree of the fictitious president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 31, 1999, number 1762, on the temporary exercise of powers of the President of the Russian Federation, which is indicated by the Federal Security Service of Russia, FSSRF, acts without change, not so much in favor of the sovereign state of the USSR, but rather so that through a fictitious decree to assign the rights, powers, and powers of the fictitious president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, cancelled, abolished, and liquidated in 1993, to prolong the inaction of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, which entails a violation with his affiliated persons of the Soviet sovereign legislation, as well as private federal laws of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, and Article 29 as the statutory code of the draft constitution of former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated 1993, which exclude and prohibit violation of constitutional norms and lead to the removal from the office of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, who de jure must resign from power as a self-appointed person to the post of fictitious president. His illegal position is vacant or is considered illegally seized or misappropriated, and any signature, decree, or other action of the person replacing him is obviously illegal, invalid, has no force and enforceability, and cannot have any legal consequences that are assessed by the State Emergency Committee USSR, Central Executive Committee of the USSR, as the activity of a foreign agent under the guise of foreign intelligence services as payment and reward for secret and subversive activities against the great sovereign country of the USSR and Soviet sovereign citizens of the USSR, as going over to the side of the enemy, providing assistance to hostile foreign state as the creation of an international terrorist organization as a criminal financial community on the sovereign territory of the sovereign country of the USSR. In this legal state, it indicates that actual absence of the guarantor of the draft constitution as a statutory code, the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, and confirms that after the annulment of December 24, 1993, of the dignity, titles, and rights to legal existence as the election of the legal president of the RSFSR, the former trade company Russian Federation Russia, during an emergency period of 30 years, as the period of submitting claims for obligations expired and completed the annulment of all signatures, decrees, and acts of the self-appointed, void, non-former, falsified president of the RSFSR of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, with the expiration of the validity period as evidenced and confirmed by the unreversed decision of Supreme Court of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, adopted in April 23rd, and are subject to cancellation and annulment, and are not subject to application, is a conflict with the sovereign Soviet laws of the USSR and the interests of the sovereign citizens of the USSR. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR, by this sovereign decree, proclaims and notifies that in the event participation in the election cycle on March 15th, 16th, 17th, 2024, as the former trading company Russian Federation Russia voters as a plebiscite from among the citizens of the USSR. Then their participation in elections and the election results will be valid for them, in no other way only holding an electoral consultation, which not has the right to use traditional rights and freedoms assigned to every sovereign citizen of the USSR under the Convention of United Nations and national constitution states as statutory jurisdictions, after which void elections, void electoral consultations, and plebiscites become potentially legal and void, since the fictitious constitutional cooperative legislative change in the term of office of the fictitious president from 4 years to 6 years in the former trading company Russian Federation Russia wasn't proper, legitimate, and illegally made and changed, and the decision was made by an unauthorized person outside the draft constitution of 1993 as the statutory code of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, as the absence of will of the sovereign citizens of the USSR, as the so-called fictitious citizens of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia at a national referendum to change the term of office of the self-appointed president. Since 2003, the private federal law on the elections of the President of the Russian Federation, including the private federal law on the elections of deputies of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, and the private federal law on the state automate system of the Russian Federation, elections began to be violated and contradict the draft constitution of 1993 as a statutory code in the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, after which the elections in 2024 are obviously null and void, falsified, not former, invalid and failed, and fictitiously elected persons are recognized as unelected participants in a coup d'etat throughout the sovereign territory of the USSR. State Emergency Committee of the USSR, Central Executive Committee of the USSR as the highest state executive body, based on the characteristics electoral systems former trading company Russian Federation Russia, informed and notified interested parties, voters as a plebiscite from among the citizens of the USSR, that in the event participation in the electoral cycle on March 15th, 16th, 17th, 2024 in the Russian Federation Russia, as well as those who declare themselves as self-authorized as fictitious citizens of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, running in the 2024 elections for fictitious presidents and their participation as candidates, put them in the position of persons who will be subject to final registration by the Soviet extraordinary state bodies and the USSR authorities in the order of reconciliation and inventory, centralization, audit of records and civil registries of the USSR as traitors to the motherland, who were declared as civil and legal deaths and removal from Soviet and world records of sovereign registers of free and free sovereign citizens of the USSR, who voluntarily went over to the side of the enemy and are recognized as dead persons, individuals, slaves, servants, and organisms for the need of transplantology, and are subject to examination by medical councils as crazy or insane, and the establishment of a final psychiatric diagnosis or recognition of them as human hybrids, genetically modified organisms, animals and transhumans who have lost their genomic identity with a person or have synthetic non-human artificial nature who lacked and distinguished human and citizen rights USSR. The status of the rights of living man and woman has been lost, as they have the status and position in the former trading company of the Russian Federation as living speaking property, livestock, deprived of any rights granted by the sovereign state of the USSR, whose participation, as in the election of a fictitious president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, is not provided by the Soviet laws and the sovereign constitution, fundamental law of 1977. All acts, decisions, letters, orders, decrees, private federal laws, regulations, and other acts of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia do not have a normative, command, and administrative nature, and are not acts of the state authority for actions and the inaction of which is fully responsible for the requirements of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, through the passage in appearance in person or in absentia of citizens of the USSR who took part in the fictitious election cycle on March 15, 16, 17, 2024, on the proposal of the competent authorities of the USSR State People's Commissariat of Justice, and the resolution of the main political directorate of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to the Sovereign Soviet Court as the meetings of the special meeting of the special presence of the Military Tribunal of the USSR, the Supreme Court of the USSR, administering justice under the sovereign laws of the wartime USSR, according to its sovereign tendencies, decisions, resolutions, determinations, and acts that are final are not subject to appeal, with the direct participation of the restored and established on the basis of the resolution of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, dated January 13, 2020, on the declaration of martial law throughout the sovereign territory of the USSR, resolution of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR, number 1 of 13th of March 2023, Sovereign Legal Act of the USSR, State Emergency Committee, number 9 of 20th of July 2023, Decree of the USSR Emergency Committee number 16 of the 5th of December 2023, Decree of the USSR State Emergency Committee number 17 of 29th of December 2023, Main Directorate of Counterintelligence USSR State Defense Committee SMERSH. This decree has the status of an absolute sovereign legal legislative act and is subject to full mandatory execution throughout the entire sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and through the entire world. In the event that any subject of law and any subject ignores this decree of the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the USSR as the highest state authority of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, this subject of law is recognized as criminal, belongs to the category of separatists and international terrorists. This decree comes into legal force from the moment of its signing. Chairman of the Presidium CPC USSR and State Defense Committee General Secretary, Chairman of the Presidium CEC of the USSR, Army General B. Satushev, Commissar of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR, Lieutenant General A. Chernomorov, Secretaries of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR, Major General I. Gorbacheva.